Knights Templar were these warrior monks, and what they did was they sometimes served as the guards for the Pope, but what they largely did was that they guarded the route, the pilgrims' route and the crusaders' route on the way down to Jerusalem.
There were only 9 of them for about 9 years, so I don't think they could have done that, at least not very efficiently. They quite clearly had another agenda. They did seem to be looking for something in the Holy Land. They were very into secret knowledge.
Even though they took a vow of poverty, the knights began accumulating more wealth than many rulers of the day. Land, money, shipping. The knights began to finance monarchies as well as the Vatican.
The Knights Templar eventually became kind of a Templar Incorporated. They started the first branch banking, which means you could deposit your gold and silver in England and expect to take it out when you go to Jerusalem, so you wouldn't have to carry it along the highways. So they became the biggest property owner in Europe. At the same time, they owned the biggest fleet.
Their vast wealth and influence made the Templars fearless and intimidating. They bowed to no king or leader, and soon, not even the Pope. Their wealth, however, might not have been their biggest threat. Historian Lynn Picknett believes the Knights may have started a new and competing religion.
Knights Templar were accused of spitting and trampling on the cross in secret ceremonies and of worshipping a bearded, severed head. And they certainly had a great reverence for John the Baptist, overtly. And what was the significance of this? We discovered that the Knights Templar, when they're in the Middle East, met a group that was known as the Church of John of the East. And it was a group called the Mandeans, who originated around Judea, Egypt, 2,000 years ago. And they were John the Baptist's followers.
The Knights might have been following a cult, sometimes called Johnites. But it's what Picknett says next that might have doomed the fearless Knights.
They rant and rave against Jesus, who they say was a false prophet, who was a schismatic from John's religion, and certainly it does seem, I mean, modern scholars have found out that it's very likely that Jesus was actually a follower, started off as a follower of John the Baptist.
Whatever the reason, the Templars soon grew more secretive, holding surreptitious meetings in hidden locations, much like Dan Brown's Path of Illumination. A growing allegiance to John the Baptist, along with their wealth and power, made the Knights the greatest threat the Vatican had ever seen.
The Knights Templar refused to acknowledge superiority of anybody. They were becoming amazingly arrogant.
They existed for about 2 centuries as an incredibly powerful, in every sense, order. And then they met with a very kind of sudden, abrupt and rather nasty end at the beginning of the 14th century when first the King of France and then the Pope turned on them.
Eventually the Templar Order became so big that they started to arouse the jealousy of the French king and also the ire of the population. They became regarded in Sir Walter Scott's term as haughty as a Templar, meaning that they just were so proud they could do anything they want, and so this aroused the people to be against them.
Question's been debated ever since exactly what the motivation for closing this order down was. The standard reason that's given is that the King of France simply wanted their money. The reasons they were given at the time for them being suppressed was that they were the heretics and blasphemers.
On October 12, 1307, the Knights Templar saw the end coming. Historians are convinced that they managed to spirit away their vast riches and collected treasure just ahead of the advancing armies of the King of France.
These wagon trains full of treasure were brought to the harbor of La Rochelle, and from there they were loaded on 17 Templar ships, which basically disappeared from history. The next day, Friday the 13th, armies of French soldiers arrested all the Templars at every temple that they could find.
And then killed them at the stake. Many were burned alive. To this day, some 700 years later, many people still fear Friday the 13th. But by 1307, when the last Grand Knight of the Templars was burned, the purge was complete. King Philip of France now had the funds to launch his war against King Edward I of England. But was the purge successful? Historical authorities like Jim Marrs think otherwise.
It wasn't very effective because the Knights Templars had plenty of warning that this was going to happen. In fact, they only rounded up a handful of them. Most of them had fled or had simply changed clothes and blended themselves into the general population.
From here, the mystery deepens. What happened to the surviving Knights Templar with their immense treasure and contempt for the Church? Did their descendants become the Illuminati?